This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
Welcome to Her Story, the journey to winning a seat at the table. I'm your host, Mary J. Murray, and this program is a series of conversations with inspirational women with amazing stories to share. And stories are a tapestry of lifelong experiences and events. Let's explore the journey. My guest today is Elizabeth Zetlin, and she is an award-winning poet, filmmaker, and author of 6 books. She is also the Owen Sound's inaugural Poet Laureate in 2007. And she is the co-founder and artistic director of Words Aloud Spoken Word Festival. Wow, that's a mouthful. She is also honored as the Outstanding Individual in the Arts in 2013 and Volunteer of the Year in 2020. She has co-produced and directed a documentary on climate change called Resilience, Transforming a Community. Now, by not staying home and vacuuming, Liz has brought her own seat to the climate change table. We often see very accomplished women in leadership roles. However, leadership can emerge at any stage and at any age, and this is Liz's journey. Welcome, Liz, and thank you for taking the time today. You are on quite a journey.
Thank you, Mary Jane. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, starting at the beginning, your journey actually started in Norfolk, Virginia. And so could you tell us about your early years there?
Yes, that's right. I grew up in the segregated South in the 50s. So I saw racism, the separate schools, the beaches, the drinking fountains, the neighborhoods. There actually were even lynchings, I read later, still going on when I was a little kid. But I was in a privileged position. I was white, I was middle class, and even though I was Jewish, I was still in a privileged position. It meant that I was excluded from certain places and events, and I was bullied for being a brainer and chubby and wearing glasses. But in the 50s, there really was a veil of silence over things. You didn't talk about what was really going on. It was all the Southern charm, and I felt completely lost in all of that. But luckily, my parents, their parents came from Russia, escaping the pogroms. And so my parents were born in the United States and they lived in the North, but they ended up in the South. So they had a different viewpoint than most of the people that I grew up with. And my father was a doctor, and my mom became an artist in her late 40s, which was a huge influence for me, because that's what I did as well, that I could find out that you could do something that late in life. And she was also an activist. And another thing that was really important early on was reading. And I was always read to bedtime stories. So I think that had a big influence on me too. And one time, I think it was around 7, when my mom would have her friends over and she would read Shakespeare. So she was reading Macbeth, and I got to be the 3 witches. and so I was reading Double, Double, Toil and Trouble, Fire, Burn, and Cauldron Bubble. And to have those words in my mouth, I mean, I think it was like, that was maybe how I started out feeling the power of words and poetry. But and another thing growing up was we lived on the water. So, and I was allowed to wander. I could take the boat out, a little rowboat by myself, and go through the marsh and look at the herons and hang out in this little pine forest we had in the back and skate all around the neighborhood, which I don't think kids can do now. So that gave me a freedom, but I was just bathed in water and nature, and that was so important.
Well, I think from reading your poetry, as a matter of fact, the first time I met you was at the Random Acts of Poetry in 2006. You were sitting on a bench in front of the library, and I was crossing the road towards it, and you invited me to sit down on the bench with you. And you did the Random Acts of Poetry, which I loved, and you gave me this book that was wonderful. I've been rereading it again. And I have the original Words Aloud for 2006 still in the book.
Oh my goodness.
But what I noticed so much through your poetry is your reference to nature, to soil, and growing things and planting things and being in that nature, and also the connection with water in your poetry. And so what actually your early years in Norfolk shaped your path going forward, almost as like pivotal moments when you start to use the language. So what led you to poetry? Because you had an eclectic career path before you got into poetry.
Yeah, well, I didn't start writing poetry until my late 40s. And I guess when my mother became an artist, and I was raising two sons and working full time, but I felt there was this just gap in who I was and what I needed to do. And then, when you're a mother and you have a full-time job, you're never alone. And my husband went away for a week with our sons and drove to different baseball games in the States because they were great baseball fans. And I was still working, but I had the whole house to myself. I don't think that has ever happened. And I went into every single room and just started writing. And, the bathroom, everybody's bedroom. And I just took over the whole space, and I've never stopped since. So that was kind of a catalyst, just have that time, which you don't normally get as a woman, as a mother, as a worker.
Well, I can understand that completely, sharing that path. But then your poetry became published, and then because you've written 6 books already.
Right. I had my first book published when I was 50. And that was just, when you get your first book that you've written in your hands, it's just incredible. Of course, I still have a lot of boxes of them in the basement, but, poetry's, I think at that time, if you sold 500 poetry books, it was a bestseller. And I certainly didn't do that. But yeah, I think I tried many different things in my life. I worked in commodity futures, and I was assistant to the chief librarian at the Toronto Public Library for a long time, but I never really wanted to work in the arts for my job because I felt that would dictate what my art might become. I just wanted to do it on my own, by myself.
So there was a sense of independence in the choices that you were making. So this love of language and nature and water has led you to your poetry, But then your poetry, that was a pivotal moment, when your voice was being heard through your work, through your poetry. But then it led you to the next stage of the spoken words.
Right. Well, thinking, I think I wasn't a poet laureate then when we started the festival, but it seemed to me our area is such a great music area, but there wasn't really anything for poetry. And the local poets were going around performing to each other a lot, but I wanted to bring in the best Canadian poets at that time, the festival was in Durham. And it was just, wonderful, because I got to talk to all of them. And I invited, as artistic director, we decided to have a spoken word. And we didn't really know what that was exactly, but it just means really there's page poets where people read from their book, and sometimes they don't even look up, and kind of monotone. And then there's the people that have memorized everything and they perform it. That's more spoken word. So I think we did about 16 years of the festival. And then because of the pandemic, it's on hold for now. But that was a huge, I guess, inspiration to have those poets come to this little town of Durham, and they loved it. People like Lorna Crozier from BC, who's Governor General award-winning poet, said, "Please invite me back. This is the best festival."
Well, that is amazing, because it has actually brought so much in terms of the arts to our community. And now I understand you're being named the outstanding in the arts, outstanding individual in the arts. I didn't realize at the time that you were behind the Words Aloud Festival, although I knew of them, and I know that the library had the occasional storytelling and spoken words in the library when I was working there. But then it's gone on to the next stage. It's almost like this progression that you've been going through, and when you have sprung into your 40s and starting to reclaim your artistic side and your voice. Now you've moved into filmmaking and developing that side.
Yeah, I started that in my late 50s, I guess. The first film I ever made was an iMovie film when we took our 2-year-old grandson to the Metro Zoo, and he threw his running shoe into the orangutan cage, and then the baby orangutan picked it up and started chewing on it. And luckily, I was just taking pictures, but luckily my husband had the presence of mind to get a zookeeper who came in and fed the orangutan some apricots and got the shoe back. But I put that into a little movie with rhyming couplets for our grandson. But I started doing what I call docu-poems. So the text of a video, I would be narrating a poem, but with video. And that really started out as art when I was invited to be part of the Limestone Barrens project by Stuart Reed, who was the director of the Tom Thompson then. And it was artists and writers from Ontario, Newfoundland, and Ireland. And we all got together and we were taken around the Limestone Barrens, or the Alvars on the Bruce Peninsula, the Great Northern Peninsula, and then in County Clare in Ireland. And I was just kind of gobsmacked by the landscape. And I was supposed to write something, but I just couldn't come up with anything. So I was taking, of course, I was taking photographs all along and video. And I remember when I finally I did all these videos about the Barrens, and that was one of the best projects I've ever been involved in, because it combined nature, poetry, video, everything that I love doing. So yeah, those are on my website.
And this has led you to another major project that you did, and that is the climate change documentary. But before we get to the actual documentary part of it, which I reviewed again yesterday, which is absolutely amazing, but you started in filmmaking, but what actually was the pivotal moments when you decided it needed to be climate change?
Well, I've been involved in climate action long before that film started, with 350.org and Transition Town, and probably about 3 election cycles ago. Carrying little signs about, no one was talking about climate change really when we first started doing this. But, and I was getting quite full of despair that no one was listening and the governments weren't doing anything, and nobody really understood it. But I guess it was 2017 that I went to hear a talk by John Anderson, who's a retired marine biologist, but he's also become a climatologist. And I was so impressed with his data and how he positioned things. And then somewhere along the way, he said, I'm tired of he'd been doing these talks for 5 years. He said, I want to reach more people. Would you do a film with me? And I didn't hesitate. I said, sure. And I had no idea what that was going to mean. 3 years later, after we started, we had the film. But it's the most challenging thing I've ever done, to try to tell the science part, but also to add the stories so that people would actually care about, and also have some hope about what they could do. And then in May in 2019, it debuted at the Roxy. I don't know if you were there, but we thought, oh, we might be lucky if we get 50 people. And there were 450 people, standing room only. And I mean, and that was just the start of here locally, I would say, where we started to engage people, and it hasn't stopped.
Well, it was actually a springboard. The film was so well received within our community that it was actually a springboard for more action that is continuing now. But that was when your voice was really heard and really resonated throughout our community.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, I think it's probably one of the most important things I've ever done, and John and I are really proud of it. It's still being screened 3 years later, and groups are getting together and they're asked to watch the film first. And then there's a discussion, facilitated discussion of what can I do. So any group that wants to have that kind of discussion and conversation can request it.
Well, one of the things that you and John did was not only put this film together, but you actually sparked the momentum around climate change. And this is really a very important, not only important topic right now, but it's critical for our planet's survival that climate change is taken seriously. And when you were putting this film together, you and John putting this film together, what did you hope this leadership would change?
Well, the thing that John said in the film is the most important thing that people can do is talk about climate change. And I think that's happening. We hoped that, well, our big hope was that there would be a network, a regional network of people getting together, working together, and working with their municipalities, so that that has happened. There's now a network of about 10 Grey Bruce municipalities that meet once a month. They're all working with their municipalities in some form or other. Either they have a formal committee or an informal committee. Owen Sound, our Owen Sound Climate Action Team is meeting with city staff regularly. And then this network, GBCAN, Grey Bruce Climate Action Network, gets together once a month and shares ideas, and they're also working with Grey County. So the conversation is happening. Some municipalities have even hired climate coordinators, and I'd say Owen Sound is a little reluctant to move forward without being told what to do by Grey County. But our goal is to have a partnership with them and to be an asset working with them. So that's what our aim is.
And when you were putting this together, did you ever think that it would have such a huge impact on our region?
No, not really, because I'm used to not having an impact, really, in terms of poetry. I mean, there's a very small audience, and then the Words Aloud Festival enlarged that. And my videos, well, the one video that has gone worldwide that I did is Keepers of the Water. So that's had quite a huge impact. It's because it tells the Indigenous story of women being keepers of the water. But no, I'm thrilled that this has happened. And now I've taken a step back from that leadership role because there's so many other people that have stepped forward. So I'm kind of working more in the background, and also because about a year and a half ago, I had a concussion. So I've had to limit my online time drastically. So I couldn't go to all those Zoom meetings.
Well, I certainly understand the Zoom meetings because that became our life for a while. But through your journey, and you came to poetry and your path forward later in life, but through your journey and the many jobs and careers that you've had, and now you've really blossomed into this climate change environment, what did you actually learn about yourself?
A lot, how to deal with uncertainty and change and develop resilience. Because I immigrated to Canada when I was 24, didn't know anybody, only had a few $100s, had to make a new life, left my family, friends, and country. So I know a bit about the immigrant experience. You'd think being American, everything would be fine, but it wasn't. I quit actually saying I was American because there was some kind of backlash going on there. So I think I've developed a fair bit of empathy for people that are marginalized. One big pivotal moment for me was when the schools in Norfolk were closed because they refused to integrate. And I was 13 at the time. So I got sent to a private school, but when the schools did open up and I went to public school in grade 9, there was one Black girl in the class. And she sat behind me in one of my classes, and I never spoke to her. And that was a huge catalyst for me. At the time, I think I was so shy. All I wanted to do was disappear into the woodwork. I didn't want anybody to even notice me. But that was part of it. But I guess there was also this fear that, I'd be picked on and bullied. So I've gone back and studied about her. Her name was Billie Jean Reed. And that's just become such a huge thing that if I see injustice, I have to speak out. So that's one big learning, and also that my voice matters, and I need to use it.
Well, I have a quote here from you. You may recognize it, but I think it really sort of sums up what we've been talking about. And that is funny how when we really pay attention to one thing, like salmon, a lot of other issues emerge and everything's connected. So when I read this quote by you, it actually was the story around being down at the Mill Dam and watching the fishers, I guess, catching the salmon and wanting the roe for that. And one of the gentlemen said, well, like, why aren't you home vacuuming? And it was a good thing that you weren't, because it sets you off on this amazing journey that that we in our community are all benefiting from.
Yeah, that was a really interesting moment. I was actually filming them milking a female salmon, and her eggs were coming out, and visually it was really stunning, but I was, and a bit disturbing, but I was right in their face with the camera. And this guy said, "You should be home vacuuming." And then this other, he also said, "My wife is all gimme and wanna." And I was like, what? And I didn't know what to say. And actually I posted that on Facebook later and said, what would you have said? And I had this, actually I write a whole essay about it using people's comments and, so yeah, my husband and I share the vacuuming.
Well, we're so glad that you didn't stay home that day to vacuum, because it has led you on this really amazing journey. And thank you so much, Liz, for spending the time with us today. We've learned so much about you and your journey. And I'm hoping that you will tune in again next time for another amazing story on her story, the journey to winning a seat at the table.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line, email us, or connect with us on social media.
Hello everyone, your host Antoine Hashim here on the couch, and welcome to season 8. Yay! 8 seasons, and we've got a lot of awesome guests coming up, so keep watching.
The fate of the family is gonna come down to you.
I can't do this.
Let me help you. The